Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing a 25.18 support tier list. So if you're over content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There was only one really targeted support change this patch, and that was a buff to a Moo support. He hasn't really seen play in a while, and they kind of wanted to give him some power to allow it to be there as an option if people want to opt into it. We did see changes towards the likes of Hui and Vel'Koz and Ashe, in fact. None of these changes were really targeted towards the support role, albeit Vel'Koz is going to obviously gain a decent amount as his primary role is still support. But the buffs were mostly towards his late game ult damage and some ECD, which will have meaningful effects for support Vel'Koz, so it has been a bit of a shifter, but not going to be too much in the tier list. So let's get into it. The DT is going to consist of 4 champions, that is Twitch, who still just doesn't perform that well in the support role. I don't really recommend him here. His play base has practically died out in support as well, so I might not continue to have him on the tier list much longer, as there just isn't much of a point. I don't really recommend him, and he just isn't that great in his current state. Malphite sits within the D tier, still has a player base, obviously paired primarily alongside Yasuo as like a gimmick pick. It actually has more support functionality than most people probably believe it does. It's not great. Like, I still have it as a D tier option. I don't think you should play it. I still think there are just substantially better options to go to, but it's not unplayable. It is there if you maybe just want to have fun and like opt into it as an option, but I wouldn't really recommend it. Veigar is kind of like Malphite, where it's just paired alongside the Ziggs. It doesn't perform that well in the support role at the moment. Honestly, if they buff maybe Chevaliers and Veigar, obviously if they site buff, you could see it jump to the C tier. It has been a niche option in the past, but definitely not something doing that well at the moment. And then Ashe had a buff towards her scaling AD growth, her AD growth this patch. It's a scaling buff towards AD Ashe. It just doesn't really affect support Ashe that much. Ashe support is still one of those picks which, if you're really, really comfortable on it, you can maybe get away with it in certain spots, but really is just not a pick I'd ever really recommend. It just isn't that great in its current state. Moving on to the C tier then, we lead off with Yuumi. Yuumi got heavily nerfed in a recent patch. They kind of went after her scaling after already nerfing like her general kind of kit beforehand. She's a pick I just don't really recommend in general. I don't think she teaches particularly good habits about the game, and if you're playing Yuumi, you probably just play it because you enjoy it, and then the state of the champion might not matter as much to you. So Yuumi, gonna be in the C tier. I just don't really recommend her in the current meta. She can be played alongside some like specific kind of marksman, like the standard ones are like Lucian, Tristana, and I'm just thinking one here, Zeri. There's like 3 options you can go towards, but just a pick that I don't really recommend at the moment. The other picks within the C tier include the likes of Renata, who is in a pretty dire spot at the moment. She is the least popular main role support in the game, which is unfortunate to see considering she's actually a relatively new release compared to some of the other options. Sits in the C tier at the moment, just a pick I would kind of recommend avoiding. I think the issue with Renata is that she became so heavily tied to Kalista in pro play, and has to an extent become like a pro skewed support, but it just left her solo queue state in such a bad spot for a while that Riot the champions just ended up feeling kind of neglected. Needs some changes done to her. Right now, her current iteration probably just isn't going to be consistently supported long term. Like, I think they'll end up doing something. When that happens, I don't know. Short term, long term, who knows whether Riot is like happy just keeping her in like this really unpopular kind of weak state at the moment. But she does remain as a C tier option. The other 2 are Sylas and Mel. Mel is being buffed next patch. It will probably shift her up to the B tier. Mel has the issue of that people just don't max her correctly. Like, if people E-max on Mel, she's pretty solid across all 3 of her roles. Support is her weakest role. Like, it's not amazing, but I think situationally, and if you're comfortable with the champion, you can make it work. So I do have it as a C tier pick, like a high C tier pick at the moment. Especially if you E-max, then it probably even gets bumped up to like a low B tier option. And then Sylas is like a counter pick support champion. Ever since Sylas has been pushed more towards the bruisery variants, like your Protobelt Riftmakers, it just doesn't perform that well. Support Sylas was kind of built around the fact that he could just like burst people down and had a lot of upfront damage, but he's lost some of that in trade for more extended play patterns. So yeah, it's just not as good anymore. You can still get away with it if you're very comfortable with champion and you play it as like a counter pick to dual bot laners with good ultimates you can still away. Obviously, the example I've continuously used as like Varus Leona, for example. There are more than just that, but it's just not that great in its current state, so you're probably best off just avoiding it. Mumu, I've bumped him up to the B tier. The change was nice, actually meant something to him. The fact that Mumu is he's an easy champion to play, I think is great. Like, it really opens him up as, like, an accessible support option. I'm kind of glad that Riot are just willing to, like, enable him to be viable here. I think that's, like, decent for the game. That being said, though, he still struggles with itemization. Once again, like, common examples, I use Even Shroud. When that existed, Mumu support used to be really good. Even Shroud doesn't obviously exist at the moment, and he definitely suffers from that. I've seen people go, like, various things, like, Locket seems fine. Leandry's actually performs quite well. Redemption's obviously OP this patch and might just be your best default option. No, like, Zeke's as an item you can go. Zeke's is not in the greatest of states though, so might be a skip in a lot of situations. Overall, I think I would leave him as like a mid B tier option. If you're the lower down you go, the better it probably is. Especially if you pair it alongside kind of Misfortune, who traditionally is just more popular in lower MMR brackets. I think you can make it work. So yeah, I think I'm gonna push him to the B tier as like a viable option, easy to play, just accessible when you kind of want him and when you need him within the game. The other B tier options, for the most part, just stay the same. Galio, I bumped towards the bottom of the B tier. His nerf this patch actually ended up being pretty sizable. Hearts' ability to just consistently do as much upfront damage, and yeah, that affects him. So I've moved him towards the low end of the B tier. He was already like a low B tier option because he's a bit more conditional than some of the other champions in the support role. Maybe long term I'll drop him down to the C tier because he also has like similar issues to like Yazak and Yuamumu's, where the item system just doesn't really do that much for them at the moment. So yeah, gonna be towards the low end of the B tier. Tom Kench also have towards the low end of the B tier. I also don't really recommend Tom Kench at the moment, albeit in this elo bracket, he works more of as like a carry support option. You build hearts still, and you just kind of take matters into your own hand. You do a lot of decent amounts of damage. The higher up you go, though, you tend to be more reliant on facilitating, like utilizing your ultimate effectively to like peel for targets. And I think that iteration of Tahm Kench just kind of sucks at the moment. People have kind of figured out how to like work around it or play into it, and that's kind of left it in a pretty dire state. Combined with the fact that Tahm Kench received a plethora of nerfs towards, I believe, the beginning of this season, which was just, yeah, he's not in the greatest of states, so I have him towards the end of the B tier. Teemo, honestly, like, he's like a high B tier option at the moment. Teemo support's like genuinely kind of slept on, especially in low MMR brackets. It's actually good, like it's like decently good, like almost frighteningly. It has good scaling, it works quite nicely into certain pairings which have like limited counterplay towards the Q. It has good poke. He's relatively strong in isolation as well. Like you can just actively 1v1 and like fight just like team fight with this champion. Like he's not bad, and I think if you are the lower down you go, honestly, more of a consideration. So I'm gonna move him towards like the mid to high end of the B tier. I would say he's like a mainstream support, and he's always gonna have the issue where people are going to think you're trolling if you lock in Teemo support. But I think that like that overall perception's definitely shifted a bit. Like, it's not as common anymore. Like, people are a bit more open to just Teemo support as an option. Swain sits towards the low end of the B tier. He has the issue that his kit just doesn't really work as well in support, albeit it's still his most popular role. Like, I will always recommend bot lane Swain and mid lane Swain over support Swain, like, every day of the week. But, like, there are games where it can work into those, like, yeah, low damage compositions, which don't really have the tools to kind of cut you down as quickly. You can get good ult value, like, maybe multiple rotations off, or your E is able, like, you can consistently land your E. I think he can work, but he's a pick I just don't really recommend just learning mainstream for support. If you want to play Swain, you should just play him in one of the other two roles at the moment. Shen, similar issues to Galio. The current itemization, like, just doesn't support him quite as well. Obviously, you go Locket and Redemption quite a bit. And Redemption, yeah, once again, very strong item on the current patch, is getting nerfed next patch. But I do have him towards the low end of the B tier. I think as like a counterpick to like Leona or Nautilus maybe, he can come out. Outside of that, just don't really pick him. Hui sits towards behind of the B tier. The buff to him this patch was really good, helped his support quite a bit because it buffed up one of like some of his utilitary kind of aspects of the champion. And yeah, I'm gonna move him towards the top of the B tier. Honestly, if you're comfortable with the champion, he's like an easy A tier option. So yeah, I definitely think Hui support sits like right at the top of the B tier, if not A, like if you've like sunk the time into it. Seraphine's quite bad at the moment. I've probably overrated Seraphine a bit, and she should also be sat towards the low end of the B tier. Albeit, I actually do kind of have Seraphine towards the low end of the B tier, so if I have overrated her, it's not by a long shot. Like, she isn't great in the current state of the game, but she's being buffed next patch, so definitely something to be aware of. Pyke sits within the B tier. He is a how would I describe him? He is a champion which I think if you're comfortable on can be really good. He's obviously elite skewed, very elite skewed, if not just outright the most elite skewed support. Maybe Bard is like competitive in that space, but definitely like has that as an issue of the champion. And you do have to close out games early in the bracket of play where games traditionally go quite long. Just he's not a pick I'd really recommend, but if you're comfortable with the champion, you like the archetype, then he can still be a really good pick. So Pyke, I'll have him in the B tier. I think he like maybe should be like here, for example. I think that's like a fair kind of like placement of the champion. It's weird seeing Teemo as high, but like Pyke, I'll have him like here. I think that's fair. Blitzcrank, I think is a counter pick. It's fine in the current like state of the game. He has to come out as like an option, like as like a counter to these immobile range lanes. That's traditionally where Blitzcrank performs the best. As like an answer to engage supports, he just isn't that good. Like, if anything, you're like self-counter picking at a point, you're enabling the engage support to kind of do what it wants to do. So I think he's conditional at the moment, and if Blitzcrank's conditional, it's hard to place him any higher than the B tier. So yeah, he sits within the B tier as of the moment. Lux sits within the B tier. She has the issue of Lux is she oftentimes needs to be in like these pretty heavy lane bully lanes, and if you're playing Lux a bit more broad, she ends up being kind of bad as an option. But if you're comfortable with your like where you want to play Lux, you play her in these like harass heavy lanes like your Jins and your Caitlyn's, for example. I think she could be a fine option. Plus the fact that she's like a bit more like heavy agency is like fine to opt into as a support. The higher up you go, though, the less I recommend her. Like if you are, I don't know, plat below, maybe. I think she's a bit better of an option because, like, yeah, you get a bit more carry potential in yourself. But the higher up you go, you should probably start opting into something with a bit more, like, either utility or just, like, helps your team a bit more. Seraph sits within the B tier. He is fine as an option. I think, once again, like, a lot of the top of the B tier options are just fine or good if you put mastery into them. So Seraph, I kind of believe, sits in that space at the moment. Fiddlesticks sits within the B tier. He's lost a lot of his player base. He's a bit more niche at the moment, so I think it's fair to put him towards, like, yeah, the mid to low end pack. He isn't bad though, like his ultimate's an incredibly powerful ability, and the utility this champion provides through his CC is very nice, so I think he's like an option there. But if you're not an OTP, you're probably just not going to consider him, or like if you haven't sunk a lot of time into him, you're probably just not going to consider him as an option. Zoe, this is a great pick. Similar to like a lot of the low A tier and B tier options, like your Nidalees, your Elises, your LeBlancs, your Hueys, your Zoes. These are mid laners where if you're comfortable on them, they can be pretty good options. I think she just sits in that space. Honestly, Nico is like a more mainstream support, but she kind of like fits in the same vein. Where if you're really comfortable on these champions, they can be great picks, but you do need to put some time into them. They're not the kind of champions you can just first time and expect to kind of get away with them. You need to execute their combos correctly or utilize their kits in the way that they are like strong in support. So like Nico, you have to be able to effectively use her W and kind of bully people out of lane. If you don't, then she just ends up being less valuable than other support options you can opt into. Maokai sits within the B tier. He's fine, like a lot of the top of the B tier. I think you can opt into him if you enjoy that like playstyle. If you don't, you're probably just not going to really consider him as an option. Pantheon, I dropped down the other patch. I think he's still a good option, and but I like to kind of compare him and like Pyke with each other because they kind of fit similar like vein of ideas where they're AD supports, where if you want to opt into them because you need a bit more AD damage in your team or you want a bit more agency for yourself, then you can. I think Pantheon's better for low MMR because he's just a bit easier to pilot. Pyke is just better in Elite though because he is just stronger with Mastery, so I think that's kind of the differential there. But if you want to play one or the other, it's not that they're not too far away from each other. Like, you can like pick and choose depending on what you prefer. The other picks within, actually, there are no other picks within the beta. Moving on to the 8th event. So, Senna leads us off. The buff she received in the previous patch was really nice. 25.17's buffs towards Senna's heal on Q and her attack speed growth. Good. Like, I think they were correct for the champion. It makes her, once again, a viable support option if you want to like have a bit more like agency for yourself through your damage, or you want to play like the enchanter build. I think both are like viable options there for you at the moment. Morgana, it sits as like a legitimate A2 option at the moment. They buffed her consistency, which is great. I'm really glad they did that. I think long term Morgana being more consistent as a champion like fixes some of her issues with the lack of, like, her kit is built around inconsistency. Like, the W, you're not going to get full ticks. The Q is a pretty missable skill, like a skill shot which can be dodged. The kind of like more consistent abilities like your E and your R, obviously, where you can well, I mean, even your R is not that consistent. Like, people can walk out of it. So yeah, buffing up the W to make it a bit more consistent, good for the champion. Bumps her up to the A tier. I don't think she's like something you can pick in every game. You need to get spell shield value out of the champion, and you kind of need to have some level of consistency for your binding, because that is a very powerful part of your kit. But yeah, she's better, so moves up to the A tier. Lulu sits within the A tier. She's been nerfed a lot of times, and she's still kind of like sits nicely as an option, especially in Elite. Like, Lulu still performs like as one of the better enchanters. This is like after her 5th nerf or something, which is like crazy to think about. Sits within the A tier. I think she's a bit more conditional at the moment. You can't just pick her and expect to like have a powerful champion on your team. You need to kind of like either get a good matchup or paired alongside a champion which you really benefit from, or like a jungle pairing. I think that's something like supports really need to consider a lot more at the moment, is like, how does your support pick benefit your jungler? Because jungle is like in a really good strong state, especially for solo queue. Like, you want to be able to give your jungler, enable your jungler as a champion. Like, I think that's really important. So Lulu, yeah, sits towards the low end of the A tier. Rel, I'm kind of tempted to drop Rel down to the top of the B tier. She's really not performing that well in average play at the moment. That combined with the fact that she's really dropped off in play rate. Like, I'm honestly surprised that Rel's like sat towards the lower like quadrant of support picks. It's just like an interesting observation. So I am going to bump her down to the like the top of the B tier. I still think if you're looking for an engage option, she's really good in that aspect, but you probably need to be a bit more selective with your games, and you need to be a bit more comfortable with the champion archetype. If you're not comfortable playing engage, then I think there are some either better options or like easier options, like your Leona, for example. So yeah, I think that's definitely something to consider at the moment. The other like common support picks are like your Borms, a great counter pick still. Is kind of limited to being a counter pick again, though. They pretty heavily nerfed him, and that nerf does affect him. So yeah, sits as more like a counter pick at the moment, albeit was a counter pick before, but still just generally was quite strong. Alistar sits within the A tier. I really like him as a pick, and I believe he's kind of sat as like the I want to say he's like one of the English. But the champion is really well positioned and competitive at the moment. I believe that is kind of the pick pros are kind of prioritizing at the moment. All the others kind of around him have been nerfed, and even he got nerfed. I believe he lost like 8 base armor, which is meaningful. It's going to hurt his durability, but he's still really good at the moment and a great engage option. So I'm gonna consistently like I'm going to leave him as like an A tier pick. Rakan, it sits within the A tier. He's also like in this similar vein of like these more not pro skewed, but like what you deem to be more traditional like support options. Like, I think that he fits quite nicely in this vein. Nidalee, like, so her player base is sunk. It's like the least popular support on this list, and that's kind of unfortunate because Nidalee support is legitimately like, if you play it well, I think it's overpowered. And I think if people really pushed for it back when it was kind of on its spike of popularity, and like it saw maybe a bit more comp play. I said a bit more like any comp play. I think it might have seen one game in total. Then I think it would have gotten nerfed like legitimately for support. But it didn't, unfortunately. So I think it sits as like a sleeper OP option, and she's probably the biggest sleeper OP pick on this list. So definitely something to be considering. I'd say the main things are E is a really powerful steroid, and that does make up most of Nidley support. The other part is you kind of want to bully people out of lane with this champion. She has a very, very powerful just baseline kit, and if you can space well on the champion, you like utilize the full kind of range of abilities she provides. Yeah, I think it's an incredible option. So it sits within the A tier. It's going to be more elite skewed, and you do want to put time into it. But yeah, it's definitely like the sleeper OP pick on this list at the moment. Shaco sits within the A tier. AP Shaco didn't get nerfed. They nerfed AD Shaco, albeit some people do play AD Shaco support. It's not as good. You should play AP in most games. And yeah, it's like an A tier option. His box is really powerful. It's legitimately not a bad champion, so I do have him in the A tier at the moment. The other ones are LeBlanc and Elise. They are also kind of sleeper OP, albeit not so much sleeper. Like, most people just know these champions are quite strong in the support role. They give you a lot of agency, they do a lot of damage, and I think they quite easily deserve A tier spots at the moment. The main thing with these kind of champions though is that like your Zoes, your Hueys, is you don't have the mental kind of like stack of or like mental load of having to CS, which is a very legitimate thing. Like, people struggle with CSing, and if you just have to, I mean, in support, like if you are just focusing on executing your combo, that is going to be like more upfront in like just like as like a main kind of like thought for these champions. So yeah, I think that does make them easier to play to an extent, and yeah, I do recommend them as like pretty solid A tier options. The other two AP options in the A tier are Vel'Koz and Brand. Vel'Koz got a buff this patch, so he is probably the #1 pick here, but Brand is getting buffed next patch, so and LeBlanc actually. So the A tier is definitely, like, the AP options in the A tier is definitely quite strong. LeBlanc might even jump to the S tier. The buff is pretty big, but so is the Brand buff. So definitely something to be considering there. Vel'Koz buff though, mid-skewed more than anything this patch, but he's a good support already, and he'll continue to be a good support. He is probably my premier artillery option here, not my premier AP option, because I do have Zyra higher. Like, I think Zyra is like the #1 pick in support at the moment, but he definitely sits towards the top end of the A tier at the moment. Terex is from the A tier. Honestly, Terex and Zilean, I'll put them like just below. They're niche, they're unpopular, but if you're comfortable with a champion, they like are very clearly like good. They are like also kind of like OP options, but you need to have some level of time investment. They aren't just gonna be like your first time them and you get good value out of them. You kind of need to like understand how to utilize the kit to like a pretty in-depth extent. Poppy sits from the A tier. It's quite interesting to see that T1, I mean, obviously I love referencing pro play, but yeah, T1 still prioritizes Poppy quite highly. They still think the champion's quite good. Honestly, I agree to an extent. Like, I think Poppy support is still quite good as an option. It did get nerfed like a couple of times because they didn't want it to be the #1 support pick, which it was for a while. But I still think it's a legitimately quite good pick. So Poppy going to sit with my A tier. She's a bit more counter pick reliant. If anything, she is. She is just generally just counter pick reliant. But if you get those like spots where you can get effective use of a W, or you can like you can reliably get onto targets, then I think she's a good pick. So definitely something to consider here. Nautilus is definitely up there. It's like one of the more consistent like hook champions. Yeah, point and click ultimate. I really like him as a champion, and I think I mean, most supports will probably have him as an option within their arsenal, so he's going to still sit towards the top of the A tier. I think if you are looking for a good engage option, he is very nice. The enchanters here are Milio and Soraka. Both these options pretty good. I'm gonna drop. Do I drop Sona down? Yeah, I'm going to drop Sona down. I'm beginning to be a bit more kind of harsh, maybe, towards the fact that I know a lot of these champions are just picked in a lot of spots, and not just spots where I believe they should be picked in. Like, so I've seen Sona's picked in some really, really bad drafts, and I think that is definitely going to be something which, like, I have to mark these champions down for a bit. I think Jana's a bit more general. You can maybe get away with Jana in a bit more spots, but Sona definitely, I think, has some spots where she can really struggle. And she isn't a particularly high agency support, so I'm going to mark her down for that. Sylvie is a great option, though. I still really like Sona. I still think as a counter pick, she can be a real good champion. But you got to be careful with the spots you're picking her in, because there are definitely spots where she can struggle. In the case of the other two, I think Milio, if you can get good value of his ultimate and you have like good pairings for the champion, that is usually where you're going to bring him out. Soraka is like the best generic enchant, just like a good generic enchanter. The heals, the silence, the honestly decent laning power she has. Like her Q can be a pretty solid poke tool. But yeah, like her scaling throughout the game with the amount of heals she can provide, really nice. So I think she's a deserving top tier, A tier support. Fresh, I feel like people are beginning to realize he's actually a pretty good solo queue option, albeit there is some level of consistency issues with the champion. I honestly would like to see him get buffed next patch for like in 25.20 for Worlds. I think Fresh being one of the kind of like premier support options is really nice, especially when they like bump up his hook, because that's like a really exciting ability on the champion. But yeah, right now he's a good option in solo queue. I think he's a very deserving top tier A tier pick. Bard sits in the A tier. He is, I mean, for elite, he's probably number one. Bard is like a pretty well known, like actually just overpowered champion at the moment. He's hard to pilot though. Like I mentioned with Pyke earlier, he is elite skewed, and you do need to sink time into him. Otherwise, you just find yourself, find that you will end up griefing some of your ultimates, or you just won't really be setting your team up maybe as like for success as maybe you should be, and that is definitely going to mark down the champion. So I only have him at the top of the A tier, but definitely one of the best, if not just outright the best elite support at the moment. And then the S tier, because obviously I've dropped Sona down, it's 5 champions now. Jana, I think, is like a disengaged support, combined with the fact that she's generally really good in solo queue at the moment, very comfortably sits here. Nami, also just very generic good enchanter. She pairs really nicely with a lot of things, and a lot of the time you'll find that enchanters get away with like you'll get away with picking enchanter in like mid to low elo. The higher up you go, you will be punished. Either just like people commit onto you a bit more, or they'll play their abilities a bit better in fights, and you are going to just get more, like you are more consistently going to get punished. So that is just something to be aware of. I think generally the most accepted mid to high elo enchanter is going to be Karma, because she has a lot more lane fight back power. You put your 3 points in Q, you max your E. I think generally she's a really good option at the moment, and yeah, I really do recommend learning her. Zyra is probably my premier carry option. She got buffed in a recent patch, and the buff was not like huge for support, but she was already like a top of the A tier option, and yeah, I bumped up the AS tier. I think she does a huge amount of damage. Her overall like CC, like what she provides, is quite nice. They lowered the cooldown on E slightly by like 1 second. So I mean, you get another cast maybe in a fight towards like the later stages of the game, and your ult is still a very powerful ability. And then Leona, she's probably my premier engage support option at the moment. Just easy to play, and she's, unlike a lot of the other engage support options, she hasn't been tagged by competitive like presence, whereas a lot of the others have had like either minor or decent nerfs. Like Rel got hit pretty lightly the first time, but they took a bit of a bigger swing the second time, so that is just something to note. And yeah, I think she probably sits as like the definitive S tier option out of them. The main kind of thing here is that yeah, she's just a bit easier to play, so yeah, that is gonna help her at least stand out a bit more. Those are my thoughts. So thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.